when you hit the chat button, and we encourage you to do it and let us know what your company's return to office plans are, when it is, did it change at all? Because I'm just still trying to understand this too. You have two options in Zoom. You could choose to chat to all panelists or all panelists and attendees, or it might just say everyone. Make sure you choose that all panelists and attendees or that everyone option so that everyone can see your chat message. I say it every single time, but I truly mean it. I feel like we learn all from each other, and we learn just as much from the dialogue and conversation and chat as we do the straight material that we present too. So this is all about us coming together as a community. But I don't know. It's we sure have had a lot of news the last few days. And it always seems to be changing. So let's give it a couple more minutes before we get officially started. And anything else? I mean, I guess because you're so close to DC, is it different in Baltimore versus DC? Just attitudes towards masking and vaccination and going into public spaces, or is it pretty much the same?
My guess is it's pretty similar. I mean, it's funny. I think the biggest difference is I'm noticing just where I am is the Baltimore City versus Baltimore County. So I'm technically like in the suburbs, and the city has been pretty strict. They're actually one of the slowest to open up restaurants to capacity. The mayor's super intense, but Baltimore County is kind of the reverse. It's a little more of kind of a free for all, and I'm kind of right in between those two. So it's definitely been a real mix. I don't have a great sense of DC. I mean, I think their culture is very different than Baltimore's, let's put it that way. So they probably are approaching masks and that, all of that very differently as well. So
it's interesting because I mean, when we look at the restaurant opening closing data, earlier on, the areas most affected in this country were Hawaii, Las Vegas pre its big reopening. I mean, you had a ton of restaurant temporary closures there, and then DC had an exorbitant number of closed restaurants. I guess we'll see where this goes. I think we should probably get started because I know we have just a ton of material to cover today. So again, if you're coming in right now and if you're willing to share, we'd love to hear just what's happening with your company and when you're going back into the office, if those plans have changed. We're still trying to construct a picture of what return to work looks like, and this is a great place to just learn from one another. So with that, Mike, you can do sort of a short view of what's going on in the world.
Yeah, we'll just do a real quick one. And it's just a few slides covering chains, so what's happening at chains across the country. And so yesterday, pumpkin spice season started with Dunkin' was the first out of the gate again. August 18th, they released all their fall drinks, their pumpkin spice options. But I think two interesting things are happening this year. One is that, I mean, pumpkin is here to stay. We're always going to see pumpkin being added to fall menus. But now, I mean, that's almost old hat. And we see all of these chains adding new flavors. And that's really the exciting thing that's happening for them. So it kind of seems like at least out the gate here, apple is going to be big. So Dunkin' has a number of apple varieties on the menu. They're doing apple cranberry Dunkin' refreshers, apple cranberry coconut refreshers. They're bringing their apple donut back to the menu. It sounds like Starbucks could release their versions next week, and there may be an apple macchiato in the mix. So it sounds like Apple's going to be really big. I think the other thing is just because it starts so early every year, a lot of the innovation we see is in cold beverages because it's still super hot when they're releasing all these fall drinks. So, if it wasn't 90 degrees outside, you probably wouldn't need a fall themed coconut refresher on the menu.
Is this the earliest we've ever seen?
Yes, yeah. I don't know. Actually, last year it was super, super early. It might have been a couple days earlier for Dunkin'.
I mean, progressively, it has gotten earlier over time because we used to see upticks in pumpkin LTOs typically like the beginning of November or something, and then it became October, and then September, and now we're in August. So
yeah,
will pumpkin become a summer flavor, basically?
A summer flavor? It could be, yeah. And then the
Okay.
next one here, I feel like a lot of people heard about Wendy's and their deal with Reef Kitchens to open up 700 new ghost kitchens over the next 5 years. So they want to open up 700 ghost kitchens in the US, Canada, and the UK. So, I mean, that's interesting on its own, but I almost feel like this kind of flew under the radar, which is all these non-traditional locations that they're opening. So this is the Wendy's hamburger stand that they opened at a Walmart in Ohio. It just opened this week, and it's a smaller location. So they have a slimmed down menu. They don't have the potatoes. They don't have some of the salads, but then they also have some unique items that you can only get at this location. So they have Frosty Fusion flavors. So it's like the only place that you can get a strawberry Frosty. They have jalapeno chicken nuggets. So there's some special things that you can get there. And also, I think the interesting thing about it too is over the next 5 years, they said that they think about half of their new builds are going to be non-traditional locations. So either something like this, I think they have a Frosty Cart at the Tampa Zoo. So just any of these non-traditional locations will be super important to Wendy's in the future.
That's awesome. This looks amazing.
Yeah, it looks great.
Fantastic looking store. Yeah, beautiful.
And I think they have another for another Walmart in the works here. And then the last thing here is just, I think a lot of people saw this. This is the new Taco Bell Defy build. So they're going to break ground on this in Minnesota this year for it to open next year. And again, it's another one of these, drive-through driven locations that they're planning to open. 3 of the 4 drive-through lanes are all for pickup and delivery for mobile ordering. So you get in there with your car, scan your QR code, and the kitchen is again kind of like the Burger King build above the drive-through lanes. It drops down to you, you pick it up, and you're out of there in seconds. It's super frictionless technology. You're in and out. And I think the interesting thing again is if you go to the next screen, we fielded a bunch of data for our mid-year trends report on whether, it looks like the fonts got messed up a little bit, but on post-COVID behaviors with consumers. Are they going to continue ordering through drive-through and pickup lanes, or will you not have to as things open up again? And this is the only metric that we had that we saw a 50-50 split, where 50% of consumers said they're either going to order from drive-throughs and pickups as much or even more than they did during the pandemic after it's over, and then another 50% saying that they're not going to have to do it as much because restaurants are open again. So we have the full, if you go to the next screen here, we have the full mid-year trend report that was just released. It's only available in Report Pro. It's everything that we saw in the first 6 months of this year and everything that we think you need to know for the next 6 months of this year. So it's 10 questions you have about post-COVID consumer behavior. It's, menu trends winners from our recent menu trends update. It's new LTOs and menu items and scores that did really well this year. And then just planning ahead for fall and winter and news that you should be watching for. So exciting release that we're really excited about in Report.
Yeah, and we're going to learn more from this in our next session. So 2 weeks from today, this webinar is going to focus on all the interesting things that are happening in the world. Mike and Renee are going to come back and join us and lead that session. These are always I like these the best. You learn so much cool stuff and you get all the fantastic examples. We actually found a reasonable use for Comic Sans over here to announce this full session next week, in 2 weeks. So September 2nd, same time, same webinar link. Join us and get all the anecdotal detail and some hard data too on what is happening in the world and how quickly things are changing in the world of food here in the US. Thanks for that, Mike. This is an important announcement, and I just wanted to show you something. So this is Patrick Carroll, and this is also Patrick Carroll, and this too is Patrick Carroll. And there is an excellent chance that you are as well Patrick Carroll. We have something of a virus. It is the Patrick Carroll virus. It is spreading. It has infected us on this webinar. You might be infected right now. If you look at the chat log from last week, here's just a little bit of an excerpt. You have what seemed like someone with a multiple personality disorder talking to themselves. It's not. It's all different people that all somehow got tagged in the system as Patrick Carroll. We need to fix this because we do not want a world where everyone and everything is Patrick Carroll. That would not be a good place for us to be. And we need your help to fix this problem. So on our last webinar, 61% of you were transformed into Patrick Carroll against your will. You may not have even known that this had happened, but it happened. And it means that you have reduced ability to do things like vote in polls, to see certain things that we flash on the screen. The system gets very, very confused. It's terrible. I'm sure you'd rather be yourself than some guy named Patrick Carroll. So I need your help to fix this. And we're going to sort of try to vaccinate against the Patrick Carroll virus right now, live on the spot. And this is a mandatory vaccination program in this case. And all you have to do to accept this Patrick Carroll inoculation is in chat right now. You could do it publicly, or you could do it in private chat to just panelists, or you could do it publicly as, you know, we're responding to everyone or all panelists and attendees. Please write your full name, first name, last name in chat, and hit enter. This will help us figure out who the heck got tagged as Patrick Carroll so we can fix this for you going forward. And if you're personally just curious to know if you've actually been turned into Patrick Carroll and you don't know, this is a way for you to find that out too, because you'll actually see on screen, am I Patrick Carroll or not? So I'm gonna hold on for a full 45 seconds, because I know unless you have a super long name, it can't possibly take that long to type your name. I'm gonna make a hard request. Please type your name into chat right now. No exceptions, no excuses. Everyone needs to do this, or Patrick Carroll will only spread. We need to get the R0 of Patrick Carroll under 1 so we can drive the Patrick Carroll virus into extinction. If not, it is the end of personal identity, and we don't want to see that happen. So please type your full name in the chat right now. I don't care how you do it. If you do it and show it to everyone, or if you do it just to the panelists and keep it private, that's totally fine, but we gotta figure this thing out. And we're gonna track our progress against the Patrick Carroll virus for the next couple of webinars. And I'm hoping we can get this thing down to 0. But we cannot do it unless everyone participates. And this is the least painful, least side effect, you know, vaccination program you will ever participate in your lives. Just type your damn name in there and let's get this thing fixed. So Mike, Ann, are we seeing significant number of names being submitted right now? If you have not done it yet, I implore you, do what's good for your fellow citizens on this webinar, and please type your name in the chat so we can get to the root of this problem. Okay, 5.
Even before you give this exercise, Jack, people were typing in test because I think they were curious. So there's a natural curiosity to know whether you're Patrick Carroll, and that will also allow us to.
You know what it's like?
So
it's like in a zombie
curious.
movie where you get bit by a zombie, you're not quite sure, and then you're like, oh wait, I'm starting to change right now. Am I still who I am? So we don't want that. So and if you haven't done it yet, and you muster up the courage later to type in your name, do it at any time, but I'd much rather you do it now if you haven't already, so we can get this fixed once and for all. Okay. With that said, we're going to share some information from one of the actually several of the many reports we have in Report Pro. And we actually wanted to start off by just showing you some of the newer things that you'll find in Report Pro. So here's Report Pro. As you know, this is our all-you-can-eat buffet of over 1,000 different reports with hundreds of new reports added each year and many reports added each week. And that's just a matter of telling you what's going on in the world. Here are some of the new things that you'll find. So new reports on federal relief programs, the mid-year trend report that Mike talked about. And if I just go to the browse button over here, you can see everything that's available to you. Mid-year trends, federal relief programs, an inspiration report on rum, more information on how to concept test as effectively as possible, deep dives into specific parts of the country and what food is like over there, what's happening with artificial intelligence and menus, the labor shortage, deep dives into things like desserts and supply chain, and the list goes on and on. So if you're interested in any of these reports, let us know and we'll talk to you about Report Pro. And if you want to get more immediate information, I'm going to let you do that right now, because I will just give you the option of opting in to get a little more info on Report Pro. So I'll leave that running for a little bit. With that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and also share a little bit of information that is quite recent. So here we, as one of the newer reports in Report Pro, we spoke with operators and we asked operators what your level of optimism is relative to COVID and during this crisis. And this is a stat that we've been tracking monthly for quite some time. And you can see where we are, that the green line are the operators that say, you know, I'm cautiously optimistic. The yellow line are the operators that say, yeah, I'm worried. I'm a little more worried, but I'm still fairly confident. And then you have the very nervous people at the bottom. So we don't have a lot of operators that say they're really nervous about their business still, because I think many of those operators have basically been shaken out of their business already, or they've gotten accustomed to the world that we live in. But we do have movement in the green and the yellow lines. So we hit a point basically at the start of the year, you know, as vaccinations and whatnot started rolling out and the virus started to retreat, where you had more operators saying that they were cautiously optimistic about their future. They had an optimistic outlook. And we hit a peak of that going back a couple of months, but since Delta has become more and more part of the conversation and what's happening in this country, you could see that the green line is getting dangerously close to that yellow line again. So we will continue to monitor this and let you know how things go, but hopefully we'll see things start moving in a positive direction again. But again, you just never quite know with what's happening in our country. So we also have quite a bit going on with all these shortages that we hear about. Mike, it sounds like you bought a car, which is an amazing thing to accomplish these days because they're quite hard to come by. They have like 12-week back orders, or used car prices are through the roof. But major issues with supply chain. And again, in Report Pro, we had some stats on what's happening with shortages from an operator's perspective. So you as an operator, as a restaurant owner, or, you know, or someone that, you know, a food service director for, you know, a college or something, have you experienced shortages in the past 3 months in these categories? And you can see that the answer is yes. Many operators are experiencing shortages. They're not able to order the products that they originally wanted to order. They try to, and they're told that it's not available at the time. And secondly, you're seeing significant variances by category. That we're not seeing much of a perceived shortage from operators for things like eggs and flour or even cheese, but we're seeing very significant shortages for to-go packaging, and chicken and beef products and a few other categories as well. I think I saw a headline somewhere too. I don't know if you guys saw it, that said that McDonald's was forecasting a bag shortage or something, that was going to be an issue coming up. So that jives pretty well with what other operators are experiencing too. The question is, what does an operator do and how do they respond to a shortage? So there's a wide variety of categories that we looked at, but for the sake of not turning this into an infinite eye chart, we just have 4 at the top here: beef, chicken breast and thighs, chicken wings, and cheese. And the question is, hey, if the product you wanted to buy in this category wasn't available, what would you do? Would you find just a different you know, supplier and try to go somewhere else to try to source it? Would you substitute a different ingredient for the thing that you wanted? Or would you actually take an item off the menu because you'd no longer be able to offer it in some way? Usually operators are pretty adaptable, right? They're usually not taking entire items off the menu, but there are some categories of products that if they can't get them, there goes that menu item. And chicken wings would certainly be one of them. It's one of the categories that's had the greatest degree of shortage. And it's also the category where operators say, you know what, if I can't get it, I'm not going to do pork wings or something else. I'm just going to take it off my menu instead in about a third of cases. That said, you do have other operators that say, you know what, I will find some way to substitute, right? You can see that in this article here. You know, the prices of wings, they've shot up like crazy, but thighs, they haven't really gone up nearly as much. So those aren't really a problem. So as a result, this operator says, I had to take many wing items off my menu. But, you know, as a customer comes here, he wants wings with a beer, I'll give him a 10-piece. But he says, I'm losing money, you know, because it cost me $11 and I got to fry it, I got to prepare it, I got to add the sauce. We end up losing money because we're spending so much on wings right now. And other places, including Buffalo Wild Wings, have pre-signaled that there may be the supply chain issues for things like wings. Other places like Wingstop say, you know, we're going to actually just try to pivot maybe and try maybe a thigh product instead, right? Sort of mirrors some of what we saw in that previous stat, that some operators are willing to make substitutions, others just say, I can't offer it at all. But the thing that is probably more troubling for the operators in those cases where you just sort of have to feel like you have to keep offering that item, even though it causes you to take a loss, which is a tough place to be. So this is what operators say they've experienced in terms of prices from products that they buy over the past few months. So I would really focus on that first column. What percentage of operators across restaurants and other segments say that there's been a big price increase to them in these categories. And the thing that you notice first is there's certainly some variance, right? Wings, beef, other chicken products, takeout packaging, those tend to be the places where the biggest price increases are observed. But the other thing I would note is that if you look at the first two columns, big price increase and not so big price increase, but still a price increase, and you add them together, you're getting to a majority of operators in almost every category with the exception of flour. And sometimes you're getting to a very, very strong majority, 80% for chicken wings, 84% for beef, 79% for chicken breast and thighs. The price realities are real for operators right now, and they're becoming increasingly sensitive to it and trying to figure out what they can actually do to save elsewhere, or can they pass things on, or do they have to seek out more affordable product? The interesting thing to consider is, what do operators actually do in the face of a price increase in some of these important categories? Do they take the hit and they pay the extra price, or do they sort of say, what, if I'm paying more for it, I have to pass that price along to my consumer in some way by raising menu prices? And you see that there's certainly different approaches depending on the category. So an operator is going to say, hey, if the price of eggs or something goes up, or flour, or even takeout packaging, which you can see over here, I have a hard time raising my menu prices based on that, even if I'm paying more. But when you get into some of those protein categories, you see an almost even split. Like, hey, chicken wings, half the time the operator says, I'll just take the hit. And a similar amount of times, operators say, I got to raise my prices to offset that. For seafood, it's about the same split, right? The numbers are pretty even, 38 and 43. For beef, pretty much the same thing, 43, 43. But for something like takeout packaging, yeah, they're just going to sort of absorb that in most of the cases. So think about the perspective of the operator, who's not just focused on, getting enough people through their doors or however else they serve food, but making sure they still have profitability at the end of the day. That's really important, right? Because for a long time, it was just about, let me have some revenue because it's been depressed so much. But now that's started to catch up. The story more and more is going to be about profitability. And there's a lot of challenges to margin right now. A couple of things that we wanted to share. So I don't have leeway to raise menu prices enough to cover my rising costs. 57% of operators agree with that. Just 17% agree with that statement. Ingredients and commodity inflation will only get worse from where it is right now through the end of 2021. Nearly 80% of operators believe this to be a true statement. They think things have gone up, and they think it's not getting better anytime soon. But at the same time, 61%, a majority of operators say, what? I'm also more opening to menuing brand new offerings if a supplier can come along and ensure the availability of their product at a good price. If we could offer some stability to the operators so they could plan better and figure out what their menu is going to look like, they will go with those ideas. So I think there's a real opportunity right now for those of you that are suppliers to the operator community to help them with this exact challenge. And you will be welcome with open arms if you can get that message out to them, and if the product delivers on the basic things that they'll need, especially in light of where we are with labor right now, that you have a lot of brand new employees working at restaurants and other places that don't have that many years of experience, that certainly don't have that much experience at that particular place, that maybe don't know all the prep methods and whatnot. Something that simplifies their life and helps with profitability, that is a winning proposition going forward. So with that mouthful, I actually wanted to pivot to probably the most important part of today's topic, today's webinar, And Ann's going to take us through this, which is our forecast of what 2022 looks like for the world of food, and more specifically for the world of food service. Ann, you have the mic.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, so moving on to, I think there's a lag in my screen, so apologies. But first, sort of tacking on to what Jack just said, I'm just going to cover some of the macroeconomic factors that are impacting this. Obviously, individual operators, individual manufacturers can do everything they can, but there are a lot of big picture things weighing on everyone right now. Both these, I think, are pretty obvious. The first one, the unemployment rate. So obviously, we're seeing really low unemployment numbers right now. It's a major challenge, obviously, for individual operators who are trying to serve patrons in their restaurants and in their food service locations. But we're also seeing that, as Jack just pointed out, trickle down the supply chain to manufacturers as well. So we're seeing shortages of all kinds of products, and a lot of that's because those manufacturers are also finding challenges getting enough workers in. So that's a major factor that's sort of limiting growth in the industry. It's also, next slide, raising those prices. So we're seeing, inflation rates going up. They weren't too bad at the start of 2021, but as operators see, and as we expect as well, for the rest of this year, they're definitely going to be going up, and we probably expect the beginning of 2022 for things to be up a bit as well. And some of why this is relevant for the numbers I'm about to go into is that, as we talk about dollars don't tell the full story right now. So, we might be seeing, some of those dollars coming back, but it's not necessarily a reflection of a healthy business, right? We know operators are still facing a lot of challenges with these inflation rates and with labor challenges. So with that said, the industry is not small. So again, these are some of the headlines we're seeing. So, I think we've all seen thousands of these articles of, operators having to take things off the menu or, change their prices, close certain days of the week because they simply can't find enough labor. Here in Baltimore, there's a restaurant that, and I actually had friends who asked for volunteers to help make their tomato sauce. They had their tomatoes in, they make their tomatoes for this 1 month of the year and, jar it, and they literally asked for help, and a bunch of people came in and, helped, and they get now they're members of a Pizza of the Month club and, get a discount on their pizza going forward.
This is a restaurant, Ann? What is this?
Yeah, it's a restaurant. Yeah, it's a pizza restaurant here. Yeah, and they literally just put a call out on social media that was we need to deal with our tomatoes and get them, make them into sauce so that we have them year round. And
this is unpaid volunteer.
Unpaid,
right?
Yep. They got pizza for their, they fed their, volunteers, but and now they're kind of a part of the special clubs and, make people are seeking out community right now. So it was an opportunity to meet some new people and kind of get out there. So, so needless to say, I think we all know.
A new labor model. We'll feed you, work for us for a couple of hours and do something that's fun, artsy, crafty a little bit, and we all benefit. Interesting.
Right. It's experiential, right? The millennials want the experience. So you just bring them into your restaurant and But so anyways, given all this, obviously things are a little challenging, but it's not a small industry. So $771 billion in consumer spend is what we're projecting for 2022. So, I know this isn't sort of the happiest time for the food service industry, but let's not forget it's a huge industry. And so, we still have a lot of power and, a lot of momentum behind us. But where does that stack up compared to the last few years? So if we look at, this is spend from 2019 and what we're projecting out for the rest of 2021, 2022, and 2023. So you can see here, it did used to be pre-COVID over $800 billion in consumer spend. And as a reminder, this is prepared food and non-alcoholic beverages. So we don't include alcohol purchases in any of our numbers. And as you can see, we don't really get to those pre-COVID dollars until after 2020, so after 2022, so not until 2023. And again, this is dollars, right? So it's 2019 dollars versus 2022 dollars. So again, some of that increase we're seeing is simply inflation. So, maybe this feels good to some of you, maybe it feels still pretty bad. It's definitely a mixed story.
So, this shows about 15% year-over-year growth in 2021 versus 2020, and about 10% in 2022, and then back to essentially normal rates of growth in 2023.
exactly. Yep. And I'll show the growth later. So
Okay,
that's
sorry, I didn't
coming
mean to.
next, Jack. So that's okay. It's okay. So the next slide you can see, and I won't spend too much time. It's a lot of numbers, but I know you guys are all super curious about the numbers. And we'll show you where you can find more of this later after the webinar. But this is just a breakdown by segment, again, of some of the key segments we're seeing and that total number, and then sort of the individual segment level consumer spend that we're seeing. And again, we'll get into some of the changes here because I know this is just a lot of numbers to look at right now. But if you go to the next slide, Jack, we'll get to your earlier point of that percent change we're seeing. So, obviously 2020 was a little rough. So, so this is real growth from year to year. So, real consumer spend dollars were down, nearly 30% in 2020. So definitely
And
was
real
a bit
growth
rough.
is with inflation backed out, right?
Exactly. Yep. And
so
so again,
we're assuming roughly 5% inflation for the foreseeable future.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So that 2021, it's 10% real, which means it's about 15%, and that's $2020 to what we're seeing in 2021. Exactly. So these are real growth numbers in that consumer spend.
Historically, if we went further back, what do real growth rates look like? Is it usually sort of that 1% to 2% range?
Yeah, 1 to 2. You were like a rock star if it was like 4%. I think maybe once we had a 5% in there, but it was more sort of like 1 to 4.
Yep.
Yeah. And so where the story gets really interesting is if we look at this at the segment level. And I think what's important, and you'll see when we sort of talk about these numbers and I go forward, we're gonna talk about it a little bit differently, because if you look at this, the story gets very complicated very quickly, right? So, obviously 2020 hit a lot of segments really hard in various levels. And what that means is every segment is starting from a really different point. So, QSR, down 14%, not great, but it means they don't have as much ground to make up. So they're also not gonna, grow exponentially in 2021.
And can we just take a moment and explain how to read these numbers? So
So this is real growth again. So this is, when you're looking at compared to the prior year. So when you look at that 2020 column, it's what was the real percent change compared to 2019.
In terms of consumer spend.
In terms of consumer spend. Yep, exactly. And so, what's interesting here, recreation, stands out as, the hardest hit in 2020. Things just shut down. It was really rough. And so the dollars just disappeared, right? So they're dealing with a much smaller dollar base. And so when you go to kind of look at 2021, in some ways it looks like, hey, it's going gangbusters. Life is great for recreation. But the problem is that growth is off of a much smaller base. So if you think of, the pie has gotten much smaller for recreation. So even
let's actually walk through that numeric example because it's important. So let's say recreation was $100 in 2019. Because if you look at that line, it's like, oh, it was down 60% one year and up 60% the next year, it's flat, but it's not at all, right? Because you're down 60% from 100, which gets you to 40, and then you're up 60% the next year. That doesn't add $60. That adds like $25 or something, and you're still net down 35 from where you started.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And I'm seeing questions about the 2019 benchmark, which is actually mostly what we have put together, because I think these numbers in and of themselves can be very confusing because you really need to see all the years together to understand what it means. You need that context, right? If you just looked at 2021, you'd be like, oh, the industry is doing great and recreation is like the place to, put my resources, when the story is actually much more complicated than that. So if we actually go to the next slide, Jack. So the better way to look at, and the way we're sort of looking at a little bit more as we kind of rebuild and come out of COVID is, where are our dollars relative to pre-COVID? So relative to that 2019 year. So, overall, the industry is going to be at 96% in 2022 of those 2019 dollars. So, we're not back to pre-COVID levels yet for the industry overall. You know, there are a
this is
couple of
real,
segments.
right? So we've ignored the effects of inflation at this point.
This has inflation. It's included in this. So this is $2019 to $2022. So
Okay.
so again, so the real story is a little less positive here, and it's hard. I know everyone looks at these. You know, when we did the numbers this year, there's literally 500 different ways to talk about them and to measure them, and I know everyone does something differently when they're modeling their spending and planning. So we tried to come up with something that was going to be clear to understand and be able to be used consistently. So yeah, so there, you know, if you want to back out inflation, you know, it should be backed out of this because it is included in here. So yeah, so you know, QSR, supermarkets, and senior living are really the only ones where the dollars are looking the same as they were in 2019 in 2022.
Yeah, and again, for all of you that don't know, these decks are made available. I know we're sharing a whole lot of detailed numbers this time, so you will be able to download this. I think you get an email from us where you can do that, or you can just go to the Datassential website, and I think you can pick up a copy over there too. Or we'll start making these available in Report Pro as well, which is the best place to get any of this.
Yep, exactly. So I'm going to dive into just a few of the segments. You know, I'm not going to bore you guys with every single one. They all have very interesting, complex stories. And as Jack was saying, we have a ton of resources in Report Pro that's informing all of this. You know, we use a lot of government numbers, but we also use, you know, a lot of our primary research with operators, same with consumers. So we've got, you know, a ton of data that's fueling all of this, and that can all be found in Report Pro. But I'm going to kind of dive into a couple of what I think are the more interesting segments to talk about. So one of them I want to talk about is fast casual. And the reason I wanted to bring this one up is that it was one of the faster growing segments before COVID. You know, they were sort of like the dark, everyone was trying to be a little more like fast casual, right? We saw QSRs trying to up their game with scratch prep and customization. You know, we saw casual dining trying to, you know, be a little more chill and offer more, you know, things that were more similar to fast casual as well.
I like what we said.
Next slide,
Casual
Jack.
dining wanted to be a little more chill, but yeah, it's a pretty good way of putting it, I think. Yeah.
Right. You know, like little, like less high maintenance, right? We're like an on the go, you know, in and out. So if we look at the dollars for fast casual, and again, this is going to be that 2019 dollar comparison. And so inflation is baked in here. So the real story is not quite as positive even as we're seeing here. So, you know, in 2022, we're projecting, you know, 67.4 billion in consumer spend, again, food and non-alcoholic beverages only. And so we're not getting back to those pre-COVID dollars until 2023. And even that, again, is, you know, nominal to nominal. So a lot of that growth, especially right now, as inflation is quite high, is just going to be inflation. So, you know, fast casual operators aren't necessarily, you know, feeling super good. You know, don't want to, it may not look quite as pretty as it seems here.
Yeah, so we're talking 2+ years of, let's say, 5% inflation, right? If we get to, you know, 100% of pre-COVID numbers, we're actually sort of down 10% at that point. It really depends on what happens to menu prices too, right? We saw the operators won't always take that price increase, but maybe as the world gets a little bit normal, they will, and these numbers can change.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so as I was saying, you know, but, you know, fast casuals, everyone, this has been like, you know, the time pivot should be like the word of the year for, you know, 2020, 21. And, you know, fast casuals are amongst those who've been pivoting. So, you know, as I was saying, fast casuals sort of used to be the one that a lot of operators, especially QSR, were sort of trying to mirror. And what we're actually seeing is some of the opposite now. So fast casuals sort of mirroring QSRs a little more. So moving out to the suburbs, adding drive-throughs, you know, reducing some of that customization, some of that hands-on prep. Obviously, no one wants to think about hands during COVID, right? And so, you know, we're seeing a lot more of some of these changes where fast casuals are looking a little more like QSRs, which is, again, the reverse of what we've sort of been seeing for so many years as everyone tried to mirror fast casuals. So another segment I want to talk about is B&I. So obviously, I think probably most of us, as you know, we were chatting about earlier, are not in an office right now. We're still at home. B&I was definitely one of the harder hit segments. So in 2020, you know, 45% of those 2019 dollars. So pretty pretty rough. And, as you can see, we're not by 2023 still at just 81% of those 2019 dollars at, just barely, just almost 11 billion in 2022. So not particularly a happy story.
So I would ask, actually curious to hear what everyone thinks in chat, and try to make sure you choose the everyone option when you do so. Do you think we'll ever get back to 2019 levels in B&I, right? Considering work from home and remote work and hybrid and all that. Do you think we'll ever get back to where we were pre-COVID, or is it forever going to be lower? Food service spend in B&I. Anne, what do you think?
I don't think I've seen a single yes yet. And I agree. Like, I don't think, I don't think it's ever coming back to where it was. And we'll talk about, there are some silver linings, but I think, I just think people are going to stay home more than they were before. And so it's going to be a real challenge. And there were questions. B&I is business and industry. Sorry for using the lingo. And it does include, one thing to note, it does include both white collar and blue collar. So again, when we direct you to kind of where we have a lot more of these numbers online, white collar was obviously hit a lot harder than blue collar. Blue collar is sort of like those manufacturing plants, places that maybe offer food service because there aren't other food service options, versus white collar are those like downtown urban centers where you're just like, feeding the office workday crowd. So, this is data from July. So, 19% of B&I operators still say they're completely closed. So, really is, a segment that's very much struggling to come back.
So if you do the math, right, I'm guessing the number is probably not too far from zero if you're talking about the blue collar factories. And I think aren't the numbers like not too different between the white collar and blue collar count? I thought it was like close to 50-50, or you might know better.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yep, I think that's right. Yeah.
That would put the number white collar, closer to 40% to get us to the 19. I'm just completely closed.
Yeah. Yep. So, and we did all of our modeling in July, and at that point, we sort of thought maybe some folks were going to come back in the fall. With Delta, we're already seeing that being pushed back a little bit. So, I know some of the big, Silicon Valley folks aren't planning to come back until next year. So the story, there was like a little glimmer of hope there, I think at one point, and it's still not looking great for B&I. That's the next slide. The one thing I will say, in talking with, with some operators, we work with IFMA and their operator councils as we kind of put these numbers together as one of our many data points and ways to stress test them. Is, food service also, there's potential there, right? I mean, a lot of folks that have stayed open, they, you can get food delivered to your desk now, right? There's these very futuristic things that we wouldn't have even thought of pre-COVID and are now becoming much more the norm. And eventually, employers are going to want folks to come back into the office, and food service is like the best way to get them to come. People love food. They, they get together around food. And so, I think we're going to see some of these employers doing some pretty cool things with food to bring people back to the office, to make people excited to go back to the office. So it's not an obligation or a chore for them to come in, but something that they genuinely want to do.
I couldn't agree more, right? Because in the past, it's like, hey, everyone's in the office already. We just need to make sure they're happy, and that's what we can do, have our food operation do. Now, a lot of companies are going to say, we're going to leave it up to you if you're going to be in or not, or how many days it is, and we have to entice you, which I think is even harder to do. So you're going to have more advanced, better options at some point, but it's going to take a while for those operators to figure that out. I think it's, by no stretch overnight or anything. But I agree with you. That's great.
So another segment I wanted to touch on was hospitals. And the reason I want to talk about this is I think it's a little bit counterintuitive. So we've spent, 2020, all the headlines were hospitals capacity, filled to the brim. But the story for their food service is actually a little more complicated and nuanced. So, hospital food service was actually down in 2020. So it was at 65% of those 2019 dollars. And although it's, by 2013 or 2023, excuse me, back up to 96%, still also not back to pre-COVID levels like we saw for fast casual. So, close to 18 billion in 2022, but again, not back to those pre-COVID levels.
So this is counterintuitive, right? Because we all think like, hey, the hospitals are overrun. They must be doing amazing food business. Can you tell us what's going on and why that's not the case?
Yep. So next
So
slide.
am I foreshadowing?
You are. Wonderful, Jack. Yep. So
There
the
we go.
reason for that is patients are actually not a significant, patients are half of the revenue that hospitals get from food service. So if you think about it, yes, they feed a lot of patients, but they're feeding them relatively simple meals, probably, not charging a lot for that, not a lot of premium. So half of their revenue actually comes from three things: employees, visitors, and then catering, actually. So obviously employees, hospital administrators, they're also working at home. They're obviously, yes, doctors and some essential workers are coming in, but there's also a lot of administration in hospitals. So, those employees weren't coming in anymore. Visitors, obviously visitors were restricted. And so, those are slowly coming back, but probably won't ever reach pre-COVID levels. Are you really going to have, 10 people come into your, room after you've given birth to your baby to meet, it's like, you're probably going to wait till you get home, because are you really going to come into a hospital? So some of that's going to really be slow to come back.
And you
and then
mentioned
the last piece,
catering too, which confused me when you first said it. What does that mean?
Yes, and so it's a couple of things. One, a lot of really big sort of teaching hospitals like host events. They do talks and have they have big corporate campuses and they leverage that space for events. There's also catering that happens that's sort of employee morale / like building type things where you offer a catered breakfast for a certain floor of the hotel. And some of that obviously went away with COVID because you weren't going to set out a spread of food. And a lot of hospitals are seeing cost savings with that. And consumers, employees, everyone's kind of gotten used to new normals, and they probably aren't going to bring some of those services back.
Yeah.
Next slide.
We're there. It's a picture of a shelf.
Sorry. Yep. So, the one thing I will say that people maybe also haven't thought of, and that, if you paid attention to our webinars, I think we've probably highlighted some of these, is similar to casual dining. We have seen some really cool pivots with hospitals too. So, they're doing all those same things. They were hammered like everyone else, and so they've gotten creative. So, we've seen a lot of hospitals literally turning their salad bar and hot bar into like a pantry of, grocery staples that are available, offering things like meal kits or like take and bake things. So employees that are coming in can, grab a meal for their family on their way home. So, I think hospitals, although again, counterintuitively haven't been great, they've also jumped on the bandwagon with everyone else and been doing some really cool stuff.
And supermarkets.
Yeah, so this is the last one I wanted to highlight. So ending on a slightly more positive note with a happy cat. And this is one of the few segments that, actually did see some dollar growth through COVID.
And we're talking not packaged products in the supermarket. We're talking about the deli and perimeter specifically. Yes.
Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, so this is prepared food areas. Yeah, grocerants. So not the center aisles. It's not just the deli sliced meat either. It's really those like hot prepared or cold prepared foods. So rotisserie chickens or, deli salads behind the counter. Exactly. So in 2022, up to almost 40 billion. And again, some actual, some growth here in dollars, which is nice to see. So the reason for that, so 74% of operators say their sales actually increased in 2020. Obviously, supermarkets were essential businesses. They stayed open. People still needed to go get food, and they had fewer options than ever before for those like fast, convenient meals, right? They couldn't go out to restaurants quite as much in 2022. And so, when they're going to get their grocery staples, maybe they picked up some prepared items as a, fast, easy, convenient meal to serve their families. So, so operators were a little more positive than, most other segments. And 2020 wasn't as painful a year for them as it was for many others. But there were changes. So, two things I can't, talk about supermarkets without two things. One is, online grocery ordering skyrocketed, obviously, and delivery availability also skyrocketed during COVID. And those are going to be some challenges, I think, for the prepared department as we go forward. We've seen in other research that prepared purchases are often impulse purchases. And so, if you're not going into the store, you're not going to smell that delicious rotisserie chicken or freshly baked bread and pick those items up. So, in this sort of short near term, supermarkets have definitely fared okay. But as we sort of think about longer term changes in consumer habits, supermarkets are going to have to figure out how to leverage those online platforms, how to make delivery work for prepared items. And so those are some of the challenges the segment's going to have to think about going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so finally, we try our best to predict the future, but we are but humans. And so, it's possible we got things wrong. There's a lot we're keeping our eye on. So, we already plan to update our numbers at the beginning of 2022. And we're always keeping an eye on all these factors that go into our models for this stuff. So obviously the new variants, we put these together largely in July. So we knew about Delta, but weren't sure yet, how bad it was going to get or, what all we were going to see. Lockdowns, like we did not expect the government to do any additional, stay-at-home order type lockdowns. We still feel that's probably the case, but if Delta gets bad, it's possible, we get more restrictions and that really limits, the potential for the industry. We expect there'll be some regional differences in how, we've already seen how humans behave, right? Like some areas where they're going to, traffic will go out faster or slower. But in terms of those government mandated lockdowns, where we were not expecting that. And so that's what's modeled into our models right now. And then obviously inflation, big one, if something gets even crazier or, less crazy, that'll impact our numbers a little bit. And obviously we're keeping an eye on the labor and supply chain stuff too, to make sure there's no major changes there that impact our numbers.
Yeah. Great, awesome. Thank you, Ann. And I did want to add too, we're partnered with an organization called IFMA that many of you are probably already members of. They are fantastic, and we'll often share some of our content in the various IFMA events. And we worked with them and a company called Kinetic 12 a couple of years ago, actually a few years ago, to put all this information online where you have projections for all the different segments and dozens of different factors you could look at. It's fully interactive and it's totally free. If you want to check this out, you can explore every segment of food service with details around each, how big it is, what's going on in there, what the future growth rates are expected to be as of current, and you could export it, do all sorts of great stuff. Just go to ifmaworld.com and there's a link for something called IFMA Scope on that homepage. It'll take you right there. It is a resource that many of us use on an almost daily basis just to understand the size and the direction of the different components of the food service industry. So go to ifmaworld.com. It costs you nothing and it's fantastic. And many of you are probably already using this. So, but if you're not, you should totally give it a look. Okay, thank you, Ann.
I'll plug, Jack, real quick, that little tiny triangle, the red triangle with the little plus sign. If you click on that, it gives you a whole bunch of more options. So I know it's kind of a small thing right there, but there's like 100 rows of data. And if you click on that, it'll give you some options to add more stuff. So again, ton in there. So
yeah, totally customizable. You're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Press that plus and you'll see the rest of the iceberg. Actually, iceberg is a bad term because that implies something negative, right? This is a purely positive thing. So this is a good thing. Okay. And we wanted to maybe dive a little bit more into Report Pro as well. I wanted to share something, and actually Gerald's going to join us to talk about some future reports that we have coming up, and we wanted to give you a sneak peek of, and some things that just start really thinking about that I think is going to be sort of important for the way consumers make food decisions. Most of the material you saw today comes straight out of Report Pro. But we have a new report that is not yet published that we're just working on right now, and Gerald's been kind enough to excerpt a few of the key, initial findings that we're going to continue to iterate on. And there's, again, this is truly tip of the iceberg stuff. This is probably about 3% of what's ultimately going to be covered in the report. So we've long said that one of the things that people are going to start using to make food decisions, it used to be about taste and convenience and affordability, and is it healthy for me? But a fifth domain has emerged, for the way people make eating decisions. And that's the domain of personal values. So Jared's been working on a report about what are the values that people have and hold around food. This matters for retail food, it matters for food at restaurants in the world of food service, but how are we bringing values into our decision-making process around what to eat, where to get it, and how to consume it? So Jared, I'm gonna have you take us through a few of the important things that you found already at a high level.
Thank you, Jack. All right, so to begin the research for this one, we kind of wanted to get a holistic grasp of the influences that shape consumer values. And what we see here is how each potential shaper of values has changed over the last 2 years. And really, especially taking the pandemic into account, we see that most consumers overall actually leaned more heavily into their families and personal experiences during this time. And, really in general, overall, every single one of these consumers leaned into more so compared to 2 years ago. But, we did notice that in some cases that the sources that people can't connect directly with, like media and famous people, they had a more sizable decreases in consumers saying that they became, just less important in their lives compared to 2 years ago.
Yeah, we've tracked some of this stuff, and there's that issue of trust too, and we see declining trust in many institutions, including media. That's been very, very pronounced throughout COVID. So it's probably not a big surprise. But here we're asking not about food in general, just like, hey, where do you get your values from, basically, right? And it's sort of the people around you in many cases, the groups that you are a part of, essentially.
Yeah, and family and personal experiences too were also the top two value shapers overall. So not just the ones that increased overall compared to 2 years ago, but also the top ones in general.
Yeah. This is an interesting question.
Yes.
Especially when you look at it by generation.
Yeah, so a lot of our research for this one kind of focused on the perceptual attitudes around food companies taking a stand on current issues. So on this one, we kind of asked, do you think it's a good idea when these kind of companies voice their opinions on current affairs and societal issues? And, it really varies generationally. Overall, most people think it's a good idea or are indifferent to it, but it's really the younger consumers, Gen Z in particular, that like this kind of thing going on by their food, by the food brands they shop from.
I mean, and you could almost see that the dividing line is really between Gen X and boomers.
Yeah.
I mean, even in Gen X, the number is still like 60 something, but it falls off a cliff among boomers. So that really is, and this certainly doesn't mean that everyone cares about the same thing. It's just, hey, should restaurants and food brands do anything about it overall? And I think you have some data too on what are the types of things that we do want to see from restaurants and food brands. What issues should they be taking stands on?
Yes, and this is pretty interesting. So we kind of brainstormed all the different issues that brands possibly could take a stance on, and across the board in our research, even from our food service operators, it really came down to hunger and food insecurity as being just having the most consumer and operator enthusiasm for tackling. And while many of these topics do have their certain appeal, overall, I think, just most people like the idea of food companies providing food to people in need. But this is another one like the previous slide that also varies quite a bit generationally.
Yeah, so if I could just add, so we are not saying here that this is necessarily what's going to happen, but if you ask people, where do you think restaurants and food brands fit in? They most immediately make the connection with things like hunger, because it's a food relevant topic. That's not where you're seeing the real increases, though, in recent years, right? If you look at a lot of it's been around some of these other social issues, and certainly if we were to pick one thing that we think is going to continue to amplify over time the most, it's not hunger and food insecurity at the top. It's probably climate, which is just going to be a louder and louder and louder conversation. So it'll be interesting to see how that number changes too. We already have, big progressive chains like Chipotle and Panera, calling out climate-friendly options on their menus, which will advance many other restaurants to do the same. I think this is in movement right now. It's in motion already. But Jared, when I look at these numbers, it's pretty different by generation. And I think what you did here is you made yellow the generation that cares most. Actually, not cares most. The generation in yellow is the one that says restaurants and food brands should most be talking about these things and taking a stand on these issues. What did you find here?
It's just like we were saying before, it's really the Gen Z consumers that have the most enthusiasm for restaurant brands tackling these issues. And, I think that makes sense. I mean, these young people are, joining society and they see all of these things going on. Just like comparing them against the boomers, just across the board, all these issues matter more to them.
Yeah, I mean, look at the boomer number, right? You look at the number for boomers, and there's a number of boomers say, you know what? Yeah, I'm cool. We should be, restaurants, food brands talk about hunger, talk about food insecurity. But don't really talk about too much of the other stuff. Like the numbers are much lower. Then you look at Gen Z, and it's like, yeah, it's actually all the other stuff that we really care about more, right? Like the hunger and food insecurity number is sort of lower there relative to other generations, and you have big pluses in virtually every other category. I think we are at a point in time where food brands will be talking about issues like this. Restaurants will be talking about issues like this. You have to be very, very careful in doing that because you could end up alienating a big chunk of your existing customer base at the same time. But this will more and more become the norm. And I don't think anyone knows really how to navigate this correctly just yet. So we're going to publish a lot more information about this in the new food values report that we're working on. It'll be available in Report Pro, but we just wanted to give you a quick preview and a couple of things to think about as we march forward in this new reality. And just we're going to wrap up right now, but there's a lot more in Report Pro we'd love for you to check out. Here's one on artificial intelligence and menus. And for anyone that didn't get a chance to vote previously, maybe it was the Patrick Carroll bug, maybe it was something else. Here's one last chance. If you want any more info on Report Pro, just click yes, we'll get it to you. If not, click no, and we'll save it for later sometime. Final announcements before we get to the final slide. We have another webinar in 2 weeks. Mike and Renee are joining us and doing their super, super fun session on all the great things we're seeing out there in the wild and what that means for the world of food. So join us same time, 2 weeks from now, 12 Central, September 2nd. That's a Thursday. And then finally, if you have any questions or you're not working with Datassential yet, just email us, hello@Datassential. And if you have questions about any of the numbers you saw here today, just talk to your Datassential rep if you are working with us already, and we'd be happy to have that conversation. Thank you again, everyone.